I spent my life crunching numbers as an accountant, squirreling away savings for retirement, always paying the mortgage on time, and I truly believed a home was a sanctuary of love and safety. When my son Daniel got laid off, I said, "Come stay with me, sweetheart. You'll get back on your feet soon." He arrived with his wife, Sarah, and their 2 kids in tow. They took over the upstairs bedrooms, and I moved my things to the living room to make room. I cooked, cleaned, paid every bill, and never complained, not once, until one day, in front of his friends, Daniel looked me in the eyes and said, "Old folks don't belong in a home where kids are being raised." He said it in my house, staring at the woman who'd raised him from a baby. I stayed silent, didn't utter a word, but a week later, I handed him an envelope with a letter and a notice inside. "My name's Elizabeth Harper, and I was 67 when Daniel called, his voice shaky, saying he'd been let go from his job. It was a Tuesday in early spring, the kind of day that hints at warmth but still carries a chill from winter. I was in the kitchen, sorting through mail, with the radio humming softly in the background. When the phone rang, he swore it was temporary, that the company was downsizing, and he'd land on his feet soon. I heard the pauses, the way his breath caught like he was faking confidence. Without hesitation, I told him to move in with me, plenty of room in the house, and it'd give him time to job hunt. He mumbled a quick thanks, sounding almost embarrassed. I brushed it off, saying, "That's what family does, kid." I'd owned my home in Cedar Falls, Iowa, for 28 years, a cozy 2-story with chipped blue shutters and a porch swing my late husband, Tom, and I hung up before his heart trouble worsened. We bought it in '89 when interest rates were brutal, and we thought we'd be eating off folding chairs forever, but we made it ours. Over the years, that house became more than walls and a roof. It held every struggle we'd overcome. Tom passed 8 years ago, and the kids had long since left. The place grew quieter, but never empty. I had my morning coffee, my romance novels, my puttering in the garden, and the rose bushes I kept up for Tom. For days after that call, Daniel arrived. He wasn't alone. Sarah and their 2 boys came too, like a weary caravan. I didn't know the whole family was coming, didn't ask, but I figured it didn't matter. Family's family, you make it work. They pulled up in a rental truck, boxes stacked high like they were moving in for good. Sarah stepped out, glued to her phone, snapping at one of the kids. Daniel gave me a quick hug, his eyes already scanning the house like he was appraising it. The boys raced up the porch steps and disappeared inside without a hello. I helped carry their boxes in. Daniel swore it was just a few weeks, a month at most, until he found work in a new place. Sarah didn't comment, she just asked where the bedrooms were. I gave them the whole upstairs, all 3 rooms. I dragged my mattress to the living room, saying I liked how the morning sun streamed through the big windows. Sarah didn't respond. Daniel just looked relieved, like a burden had lifted. At night, I'd lie on the floor by the coffee table, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. The walls seemed thinner, stretched by the chatter of other voices. But I told myself it was temporary, that I was doing the right thing. I'd rise early to brew coffee and make breakfast. Sarah only drank almond milk. Daniel was fussy about his eggs, scrambled just right. The boys wouldn't eat anything but frozen waffles from the toaster. I adapted, stopped buying my usual brands, rearranged my mornings so they'd have the bathroom first. I learned to fade into the background in my own kitchen. Sarah replaced the couch pillows, reorganized my spice rack, took down the old photo of me and Tom from the mantel, and put up a sleek digital clock instead. "It's more practical," she said, like that was that. I didn't argue. Daniel spent his days in the upstairs office, phone to his ear, claiming he was chasing leads, talking to recruiters. I wanted to believe him, so I did. But weeks dragged on, and nothing changed. No job offers. The rental truck went back. Their kids enrolled in the local school, just for now. Little things shifted. My favorite armchair disappeared from the living room. Sarah said it was worn out. My gardening tools got pushed to the garage to make space. The curtains Tom and I chose years ago. Gone. Sarah called them dusty and outdated. It wasn't sudden, just a slow erosion, like a shirt fading after too many washes. One morning, I reached for my favorite coffee mug, and it was gone. Another day, I overheard Sarah on the phone, calling the house ours, while talking to her sister. I kept quiet. I told myself this is what mothers do, they give, they bend, they let the small stuff slide because love means patience. I'd never been one to make a scene. I'd always stepped up. But one night, sitting alone at the dining table, my dinner cold while they laughed upstairs over pizza they didn't offer me, something shifted. I looked around, and there was nothing left of me in that room, no photos, no books, just their things and a hollow silence. That night, for the first time, I grabbed a piece of paper and wrote my name, Liz, in the center. I circled it, drew a thick line around it, like a boundary, because I'd opened my home out of love, but what walked in wasn't gratitude, it was entitlement, and it had taken root. The changes came slowly, like water pooling drop by drop. At first, you barely notice, but then it's overflowing. I kept telling myself the house was still mine. But the signs it wasn't piled up, undeniable. I used to cherish my early mornings, brewing coffee before dawn, the house quiet. Those moments were mine, just me, the soft hum of the fridge, and the familiar clink of my spoon in my old mug. But once Daniel's family moved in, mornings turned chaotic. Sarah started getting downstairs first, claiming the kitchen like it was hers. She'd rearranged the drawers without asking, teaspoons in a new spot, my mugs shuffled, my cloth napkins boxed up and banished to the garage. My old coffee pot got replaced with a loud, flashy machine that hissed and smelled like burnt grounds. I asked once where my drip pot went. Sarah flashed a smile and said it was too old school, promising I'd love the new one. It's automatic, she added, like I'd asked for a robot to make my coffee. They brought in their own furniture too. Daniel's scuffed leather couch got plopped in the middle of my living room like it belonged. My floral love seat, along with the armchair where Tom used to read, got dragged to the garage. Sarah bought a bold, geometric rug that clashed with the warm, earthy colors I'd chosen over the years. When I mentioned it didn't match, she laughed and said my old rug was too retro for their taste. The walls changed too. The family photos I'd hung, Tom in his Sunday suit, the kids when they were small, even my parents' faded wedding picture, got taken down, replaced by abstract prints from some trendy boutique. Nobody asked me, the new art just appeared one morning. I found my photos stacked in a cardboard box labeled Liz's keepsakes, like I'd passed away and they were sorting my things. Sarah started saying, "our home," on the phone. I overheard her telling a friend they were settling in, that the house was perfect for the boys. I was standing a dozen feet away, setting out dinner plates, and she didn't even pause or correct herself. Daniel didn't say much, just moved through the house like he'd been handed the keys, like he owed no one anything. When I'd ask if he'd heard back from job interviews, he'd mumble, "still working on it," or "maybe next week." After a while, I stopped asking. I spent more time in the little room I'd claimed after giving them the master bedroom. It was cramped, stuffed with my dresser, Tom's old rocking chair, and a couple of bookshelves I wouldn't let them move to the garage. The closet was packed, half my clothes folded in plastic bins under the bed. I'd sit there with a cold mug of tea, listening to the thumps and giggles from upstairs, the blaring TV, the music, all of it seeping through walls that didn't feel like mine anymore. Even dinner time changed. I used to cook every night, comfort food like pot roast or creamy potato soup. Then Sarah took over with her meal plans, all charts and rules, gluten-free this, organic that. The boys were picky, and I was expected to keep up. One evening, I made meatloaf, something Daniel loved as a kid, and Sarah wrinkled her nose and said, "We don't really eat that anymore." So I stopped cooking. I'd eat later, alone at the kitchen table, while their dirty plates piled up in the sink. They'd breeze out of the kitchen without a word, and I'd clean the counters when no one was around, take out the trash, fold their towels, like some invisible maid keeping the place running. One time, I tried to reclaim a piece of my space. I hung a small photo of me and Tom in the hallway, just a little one from our anniversary years back. By morning, it was gone, tossed on top of the washing machine like clutter. Nobody said anything. I kept telling myself this was temporary, that Daniel would find a job soon, and they'd move out. All I had to do was hold on. But every day, the house felt less like home, like I'd invited them in to help and they'd decided I didn't belong. It's a strange feeling, living in your own house but feeling like a visitor. Stranger still when you realize you're not even a guest, just part of the furniture, the wiring in the walls no one notices. I'd become the foundation they walked on, and they didn't even see their footprints. There's a moment when quiet frustration turns into something else, not anger or sadness, but a sharp, cold clarity, like a switch flipping. That hit me on a Monday afternoon when I went to shower in the bathroom I'd used for 28 years, only to find the door locked. Sarah's voice snapped from the other side, sharp, saying the boys were in there and I'd have to wait. I stood there in my robe, towel in hand, half tempted to laugh, half ready to cry. My bathroom, my house, and there I was, muttering an apology as I shuffled away. I didn't talk to anyone for the rest of that day. I holed up in my room, if you could call it that, with all the bins and spare furniture crowding the floor, and stared at the one clear patch of carpet. That's when I pulled out my notebook, the one I'd kept tucked under some old gardening magazines. It started as a place for grocery lists, doctor's appointments, that kind of thing, but now it became something more. I started writing down everything, dates, who paid for what, who used what, who left dishes in the sink, who treated me like I was renting a corner of my own life. It wasn't about pettiness, it was about proof, for myself, not them. I'd spent 32 years as a school accountant, balancing budgets, running audits, keeping spreadsheets precise. I knew how to track what mattered, how to spot what was slipping away. Now, I was tallying something new, not money, but respect, space, recognition. My notebook wasn't about dollars anymore, it was about drawing a line. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw they'd used the last of the milk, as usual. The boys had eaten all the bread. Sarah left a sticky note on the fridge, "Get oat milk next time." Regular messes with Ethan's stomach. No, please, no offer to pitch in, just instructions. I stood there, the fridge humming behind that note, and it hit me like a slap. I wasn't part of this family's home. I was their hired help. That night, long after Sarah and Daniel had retreated to their bedroom, I wandered through the house, my bare feet brushing against the cold hardwood floors. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint creak of the settling walls. I moved from room to room, taking a quiet, deliberate inventory of what was missing, what had been taken from me without so much as a conversation. My reading lamp, with its soft amber glow that had illuminated countless late-night novels, was gone, likely boxed up in the attic or discarded in a thoughtless purge. The cross-stitch my mother had painstakingly crafted, its delicate thread spelling out, "Home is where the heart is," had vanished from the living room wall. The old hallway clock, its steady tick-tock a comforting rhythm through decades of family life, was nowhere to be found. These weren't just objects, they were pieces of my history, fragments of a life I'd built. And now, they were either packed away in some forgotten corner or tossed out like trash, without a single word of acknowledgement. I paused at the hallway closet, my hand lingering on the worn brass knob. I opened it, and a faint musty scent greeted me, old wool and leather, mixed with the sharp tang of Daniel's golf clubs, which leaned carelessly against the wall. Behind them, crammed into a corner like an afterthought, was my winter coat. Its navy fabric was crumpled, dusted with lint and neglect. I pulled it out, feeling the familiar weight of it in my hands, and shook it gently, watching flecks of dust drift to the floor. I carried it to the front door and hung it on the rack, right where it belonged, its presence bold and unmistakable. It wasn't that I was planning to leave, not yet, not like that. But I needed something tangible, something visible, to remind me that I still had a place here, that I hadn't been entirely erased from my own home. By morning, the coat was gone from the rack. I found it back in the closet, stuffed behind the golf clubs again, as if my small act of defiance had been quietly undone. Sarah didn't say a word about it, but the message was clear: my claim to space, however small, was an inconvenience. That same afternoon, I overheard her on the phone again, her voice drifting from the kitchen. She spoke in that low, conspiratorial tone she used when she thought I wasn't listening. "We'd love to get our own place, you know, but it's tricky right now," she said, her words sharp and deliberate. "She's still here, and Daniel doesn't want to push too hard. We're managing, but it's not ideal." Still here. The phrase landed like a stone in my chest. To her, I wasn't a person with feelings, with a history, with a right to this house I'd built with my own hands. I was an obstacle, an outdated piece of furniture cluttering their vision of a future that didn't include me. I stood frozen in the hallway, my breath shallow, as her words echoed in my mind. Not a mother, not a person, just a problem to be managed. That night, after they'd eaten their dinner and left the table in disarray, plates streaked with sauce, crumbs scattered like confetti, napkins crumpled in heaps, I stayed behind. I cleared the mess methodically, stacking the plates with a soft clink, sweeping the crumbs into my palm, wiping the table until it gleamed under the dim chandelier. Then I lit a single candle, its flame flickering softly, casting a warm glow across the dining room. I poured myself a glass of red wine, the liquid catching the light as it swirled in the glass, and opened my notebook, its pages worn and familiar under my fingers. For weeks, I'd been jotting down what had happened, the small slights, the quiet erasures, the moments that chipped away at my sense of self. But tonight was different. Tonight, I didn't just record the day's events. I started asking myself the hard questions, the ones I'd been avoiding for too long. What was I waiting for? Why was I treating this slow unraveling of my life as if it were just a temporary phase, something to endure until things magically righted themselves? Why was I allowing Sarah and Daniel to dismantle who I was, piece by piece, while I stood by, silent and complicit? The questions burned in my chest, each one sharper than the last. I sipped my wine, the taste bitter and grounding, and let the truth settle over me like a heavy blanket. Deep down, I knew the answer. It wasn't love that kept me here, though I'd loved them both fiercely once. It wasn't fear, though the thought of starting over at this stage of my life sent a shiver through me. It was habit, decades of following a script I hadn't even written. The script that said mothers open their doors wide, no matter the cost. That mothers stretch themselves thin, absorb the hard things, swallow the hurt, and call it duty. That mothers give and give until there's nothing left, and then find a way to give more. I'd played that role so long it had become second nature, woven into the fabric of who I was. But now, staring at the candle's flickering flame, I saw it for what it was, not noble, not selfless, but a kind of erasure. Every time I let them take another piece of me, my lamp, my coat, my dignity, I was letting myself disappear. I closed the notebook, my hands trembling slightly, and blew out the candle. The room fell dark, but something inside me felt brighter, sharper, like a blade honed by truth. I wasn't done yet. I wasn't ready to vanish. And if I was going to stay, it would be on my terms, not as a ghost haunting my own home, but as a woman who still had something to say. Before bed, I tucked my notebook in the bedside drawer. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at the woman looking back, trying to find the person I used to be, the one who balanced school budgets to the penny, raised 2 kids on a tight income, and buried her husband without leaning on anyone. She was still there, quiet but ready, waiting for me to wake her up. The next morning, I stuck a note of my own on the fridge, rent's due on the 1st. I didn't sign it, they'd know who it was from. The day of their dinner party started like any other, with Sarah giving orders and Daniel avoiding my eyes. No one told me guests were coming. I only figured it out when I overheard Sarah on the phone, discussing wine pairings and asking someone to bring a gluten-free cake. She brushed past me in the hallway and said, "We've got people coming over tonight," like it was nothing. No invitation, no warning, just a statement. I spent the morning in my room, the one they called the spare room, when talking to others, like I was a distant aunt crashing temporarily. I tried reading, but the same page blurred 3 times. My mind wasn't in it. The house buzzed with noise, the vacuum roaring, wine glasses clinking, the sharp scent of garlic and lemon wafting from the kitchen. No one asked me to help or leave, they just expected me to stay out of sight. By evening, the house was alive with strangers' voices, their laughter spilling from the living room, bold and carefree, like they owned the place. I lingered in the hallway, halfway down the stairs, out of view. I'm not sure why I stayed. Maybe that night, I wandered through the house, my footsteps soft against the worn hardwood, hoping to catch some fleeting reminder that this was still my home. Maybe I was searching for a trace of the life I'd built here, a familiar scent, a forgotten keepsake, or even a small gesture from Sarah or Daniel that acknowledged my presence. I wanted a nod, some quiet sign that I still mattered, that I hadn't been entirely erased from the place I'd poured my heart into for decades. Instead, I heard Daniel's voice, low and confident, drifting from the kitchen. He stood by the island, a glass of amber liquor in his hand, holding court with his friends as if the house belonged to him alone. The clink of ice against glass punctuated his words, and his tone was relaxed, self-assured, like a man perfectly at ease in his domain. "Old folks don't belong in a house with young kids," he said, his voice carrying a casual certainty that made my stomach twist. "It's not healthy for anyone, not the kids, not us. We need space to raise our boys, to live our way, without all the complications." Someone let out a low chuckle, a sound that grated against my nerves. Another voice chimed in, smooth and agreeable, "Yeah, totally. Balancing both ends of the age gap is a nightmare. It's like living in a museum and a daycare at the same time." The group laughed again, a sharp, careless sound that echoed through the open-plan kitchen and into the hallway where I stood, unseen. Daniel pressed on, undeterred, his words slicing deeper with every syllable. "We've been thinking about getting our own place, starting fresh. But it's messy. There's all this legacy stuff tied up, legalities, finances, the house itself." Legacy. That's what he called me, a dusty, outdated burden, an anchor weighing down their bright, modern plans. The word landed like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. I stood frozen in the shadowed hallway, my breath shallow, barely daring to move. His words burned slowly, a smoldering ache that started in my heart and crept upward, flushing my face with a mix of anger and something deeper, something heavier, a bone-deep sorrow that pulled at every fiber of my being. He spoke as if I weren't there, as if I'd already faded into irrelevance. To him, I was no longer a person, a mother, a woman who'd built this home with her own hands. I was the faded couch in the corner, the one no one sits on anymore, left to gather dust while life moves on without it. When the laughter subsided and the conversation shifted to safer ground, stocks, football, someone's sleek new granite countertops, I retreated, my movements silent as a shadow. I crept up the stairs, each step deliberate, the familiar creak of the third step a quiet reminder of the house's history, of the years I'd spent tending to it. I locked myself in the bathroom, the click of the latch a small act of defiance, and sank onto the closed toilet lid. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of lavender cleaner. I stared at the white ceramic tiles I'd scrubbed for 28 years, their glossy surfaces reflecting the harsh overhead light. My eyes traced the tiny cracks in the grout, faint spiderwebs of wear that I'd never quite managed to repair. I counted them, one by one, as if they could tell me when it had happened, when I'd stopped being seen, when I'd become invisible in my own home. I skipped dinner that night, unable to face the clatter of plates or the forced pleasantries of their company. I waited until the house fell silent, the guests long gone, their voices replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant drip of the kitchen faucet. The glasses from Daniel's gathering stood neatly lined up on the counter, drying in the moonlight that spilled through the window. In the dark, I made myself a sandwich, simple, just bread, ham, and a smear of mustard, and sat at the kitchen table, lit only by the faint green glow of the microwave clock. I ate slowly, the bread soft and slightly stale, each bite grounding me in the moment. I didn't cry or yell, there was no dramatic outpouring of grief. Instead, something inside me locked into place, hard and certain, like a steel gate sliding shut. It wasn't just anger or hurt, it was resolve, a quiet clarity that felt both unfamiliar and inevitable. Later, back in my room, I knelt by the small oak desk I'd had since my 20s, its surface scarred with nicks and ink stains from years of use. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the wood scraping softly, and retrieved the folder I'd started weeks ago. Its edges were already worn, the manila creased from handling. Inside were pages of notes, dates, times, snippets of conversations, small slights and erasures I'd been documenting as they piled up. I flipped to a fresh page, the paper crisp under my fingers, and picked up my pen. In careful, deliberate strokes, I recorded the date, the time, and Daniel's exact words, carving them into the page like an inscription on stone. Old folks don't belong in a house with young kids, legacy stuff tied up. The ink gleamed wetly in the lamplight, permanent and unyielding. Below it, I paused, then wrote one more line, the words flowing with a fierce, quiet certainty. He doesn't live here anymore. It wasn't true yet, not in the literal sense. But it would be. Something had shifted inside me, like ice sharpening a blade, cold and precise, ready to cut clean through the ties that had held me in place for too long. The morning after the party was eerily quiet, a fragile hush that hung over the house like a held breath. Something had broken, though no one was ready to name it. From my room, I heard the boys getting ready for school, their small, hurried footsteps, the rustle of backpacks, the occasional whine about misplaced sneakers. Sarah's voice floated through the hall, bright and polished, as if nothing had changed. "Come on, let's move it, we're running late," she called, her tone cheerful but edged with impatience. Daniel, by contrast, was mostly silent, his presence muted as he moved through the house. I pictured him navigating the rooms like a man walking through fog, sensing the shift in the air but unsure of what was simmering beneath the surface. I stayed upstairs, my door cracked just enough to listen, my hands folded in my lap. The weight of the folder in the drawer felt like an anchor, grounding me in the truth I was beginning to claim. I stayed in my room until they'd left. The kitchen still smelled of wine and garlic, with a few dirty plates in the sink and a crumpled napkin on the counter. I left it all there. I poured a cup of coffee from the half-empty pot Sarah left, stirred in some cream, and sat at the table, right where Daniel had stood the night before, erasing me with his words. The air felt heavy, charged with a decision I couldn't ignore. I could feel it in my hands, in the steady rhythm of my breath. Things weren't the same, and I wasn't going to pretend they were. I walked to the living room, opened the end table drawer, and pulled out the file I'd been building. It was labeled in small, neat letters, House, Legal. Inside were bank statements, tax records, utility bills, all in my name, plus the mortgage payoff papers, proof this house was mine, bought and paid for long before Sarah arrived, before Daniel even finished school, before his kids were born. That morning, I called a lawyer named Laura Bennett, recommended by a neighbor who'd had a similar issue with her own child. I laid out the situation, keeping it brief, and she didn't sound surprised. She said she'd seen it often, kids who stop seeing their parents as people the moment they need something. We set up a meeting for the next day. Laura's office felt calm, with soft light filtering in and a faint scent of eucalyptus. I brought my folder, my notebook, and a detailed list of everything that had happened over the past months. Laura listened closely, asked pointed questions, and took notes in a slim spiral notebook with a pink leather cover. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "We're going to make sure your house is yours again, officially." That word, officially, stuck with me. On paper, I'd never lost the house, not really. But in spirit, in the way I felt pushed out, I'd lost it plenty. Now, I didn't just want the deed back in my hands, I wanted respect, clear boundaries drawn not with kind words or wishful thinking, but with legal weight. We drafted a notice to end their informal stay. Laura wrote a letter, clear but not cruel, stating that Daniel and his family had 45 days to move out. It was firm, no room for debate, but it didn't kick them when they were down. We sent it by certified mail, and I left a copy in an envelope on the kitchen counter, tucked under the salt shaker. That night, I kept to myself. I ate supper in the sunroom, listening to the leaves rustling outside and the faint creaks from upstairs. I went to bed early and slept soundly. In the morning, Daniel was in the kitchen, waiting. The envelope was open on the table, and he looked pale, like he'd stumbled into a story halfway through and couldn't catch up. He asked if I meant it. I said I did. He tried, "But this is our home now." I replied, "It's always been mine." Sarah stormed in halfway through, her face flushed with anger. She called me selfish, said I was abandoning my own family. I let her rant, let her words spill across the floor like spilled coffee. When she ran out of steam, I told her they had 6 weeks, not because I had to, but because I chose to. She called it heartless, her voice sharp and accusatory when she'd first read the letter I'd left on the kitchen counter. But what they'd done to me wasn't heartless, it was careless, a slow, insidious creep of taking me for granted. They assumed I'd give endlessly, forever, just because I'd given so much before. They mistook my silence for acquiescence, believing I'd never find the strength to speak up, to draw a line. They forgot who I was. They forgot that I'd spent my entire career as an accountant, my days steeped in precision, reading fine print, setting boundaries, keeping meticulous records that left no room for ambiguity. They forgot that I wasn't spineless, that beneath my quiet endurance was a backbone forged by years of standing firm in a world that often tried to push me aside. That letter, though just ink on paper, was more than words. It was a wall I'd built, brick by brick, to reclaim my space, my dignity, my home. I'd written it with steady hands, each sentence deliberate, each word chosen to make it clear, I was done being erased. But they'd climbed right over it, as if it were nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a speed bump on their path to whatever future they envisioned without me. I braced myself for the fallout I'd imagined, shouting matches that would rattle the windows, tearful pleading that might tug at my resolve, or even that cold, cutting silence people wield when they want you to feel you've wronged them. But what came was worse, in its own way. There was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation. Instead, things unraveled quietly, like a sweater caught on a nail, its threads pulling loose one by one. Daniel didn't yell or storm out in a huff. He simply carried on as if the letter didn't exist, as if nothing had changed. Each morning, he brewed his coffee in the same chipped red mug, the machine hissing and gurgling as it filled the kitchen with its bitter aroma. He brushed past me in the narrow hallway without a glance, his shoulder grazing mine, his presence as impersonal as a stranger's in a crowded break room. When he spoke, it was in short, sharp bursts, clipped sentences about schedules or errands, devoid of warmth or acknowledgement, like we were co-workers forced to share a space, not family bound by years of history. Sarah, on the other hand, grew louder, more theatrical, her frustration spilling out in ways that felt rehearsed. She didn't confront me directly, but her complaints were pitched just loud enough to carry through the thin walls of the house. She'd stand in the kitchen, hands on her hips, lamenting the smallness of the space, the outdated stove with its uneven burners, the way the house felt too cramped for their growing family. "We can barely move in here," she'd say, her voice ringing with exasperation, knowing I was in the next room, folding laundry or sorting bills. Once, I overheard her talking to Daniel, her words drifting through the open window as I swept the porch. "We should have taken that apartment on Oak Street when we had the chance. It was perfect, modern, open, ours." Her tone was laced with regret, but it wasn't for me, it was for the life they hadn't yet claimed, the one they felt I was holding them back from. Yet, despite all their talk, neither of them touched a cardboard box. No packing tape was torn, no moving trucks were called. Their words hung in the air, but their actions stayed stubbornly still. A week passed, then another, each day marked by the slow tick of the kitchen clock and the weight of all we weren't saying. I kept a close eye on the calendar pinned to the fridge, its squares filling with appointments and reminders, a silent countdown to whatever came next. I watched the clock, too, its hands circling relentlessly, and the house itself, which seemed to sag under the unspoken tension, its creaks and groans louder in the quiet moments. The air felt heavy, like a storm was gathering, though the sky outside remained stubbornly clear. It was late afternoon, the golden light of spring slanting through the garden, when the reality of it all finally sank in. I was out back, kneeling by my rose bushes, the one corner of this place that still felt wholly mine. I'd neglected them during the long, gray winter, letting the cold and my own distraction take their toll. But now, with spring breathing new life into the earth, I was back at it, tending to them like old friends who'd waited patiently for my return. The roses were resilient, their buds just beginning to swell, promising blooms that would outlast the chaos inside the house. I wore my old gardening gloves, the leather cracked but familiar, and held a pair of pruning shears, snipping away thorny branches with careful precision. The air smelled of damp soil and green growth, and for a moment, I felt grounded, tethered to something that didn't demand I justify my existence. Then I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path behind me. I turned, the shears still in my hand, and there was Daniel, hands shoved deep in his pockets, his posture stiff and uneasy. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and he stood just outside the rose garden, as if hesitant to cross some invisible line. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice flat, almost accusatory. "Pruning the roses," I said simply, my eyes steady on his. I clipped another branch, the sharp snip echoing in the quiet. He shifted his weight, his boots scuffing the gravel. "You still fuss with those," he muttered, glancing at the bushes as if they were a quaint, outdated hobby he couldn't quite understand. I nodded, keeping my gaze on him, unflinching. He stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching taut between us. Then he said something that caught me off guard, his voice low, almost reluctant. "I thought you were bluffing." The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded. I didn't react, didn't let my expression shift. I kept clipping, the rhythm of the shears steady, grounding me. He spoke again, quieter now, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond me, on the roses, the fence, the horizon. "I don't know where we'd go," he said, not angry, not bitter, just a fact laid bare, like dust settling after a gust of wind. There was no fight in his voice, no challenge, just a kind of resignation that surprised me more than any outburst would have. I leaned back on my heels, setting the shears down in the dirt. I wiped my hands on my jeans, the soil leaving faint smudges across the faded denim. The sun was behind him now, casting his face in shadow, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders hunched slightly, as if bracing for a blow. I took a breath, the air cool and sharp in my lungs, and spoke evenly. "I feel bad about that, Daniel," I said, and I meant it, not out of guilt, but out of a distant, human sympathy for the uncertainty he faced. "But I'm not sorry for standing up for my home. This is my place, and I'm not letting it go." He looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like months. His eyes were tired, searching, but he didn't argue. He just gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, and said, "We'll try to be out by the end of the month." "That works," I said, my voice calm but firm, a quiet assertion of the boundary I'd drawn. He nodded again, his hands still in his pockets, and turned to walk away. His footsteps faded against the gravel, leaving me alone with the roses and the fading light. I picked up the shears and resumed my work, the snip of each branch a small, deliberate act of reclaiming what was mine. The garden felt alive around me, the roses whispering of resilience, of roots that ran deep. And for the first time in a long while, I felt it too, deeply rooted, unyielding, ready to bloom again. That night, Sarah slammed a cabinet so hard a glass fell out and shattered on the floor. She left the shards there. I swept them up, not to give in, but because I wasn't about to let broken things clutter my house. A few days later, I came back from the store and found Daniel at the kitchen table, alone. His laptop was closed, a half-drunk coffee cooling in front of him. He said he'd found a place, nothing fancy, but near the boys' school. Then he asked if I'd cover the security deposit, just a small loan. I held his gaze for a long moment. Then I said no. It was the first time I'd ever refused him when he asked for help. The word felt heavy, like a stone in my throat, but once it was out, I didn't take it back. He didn't push. He just nodded, slowly, like he'd seen it coming. The next morning, I saw a pile of empty boxes in the garage. They'd started packing. After that, the house got a strange quiet, not tense, not peaceful, more like the slow hiss of air leaking from a tire. The surprise wasn't that they were leaving. It was how right it felt to let them go. The quiet crept in slowly, like fog slipping through a cracked window. It didn't barge in or make a fuss. It just settled, soft and steady. One morning, I woke up and noticed the house felt different, silent in a new way. No cartoons blaring from the living room TV. No quick thumps of feet racing down the stairs. No Sarah's voice cutting through the clink of plates in the kitchen. Just a deep, heavy stillness. They'd packed up and left 2 days earlier. The last cardboard box was tossed into Daniel's trunk as the sun sank low. Sarah didn't say goodbye, didn't even look at me. The boys gave quick, half-hearted hugs, their minds elsewhere, uncertain. Daniel was the only one who said anything close to a farewell. He thanked me for everything, but his words sounded thin, like tissue paper about to tear. I didn't reply, just gave a short nod. When the door clicked shut behind them, I stood in the entryway for a long time. The setting sun streamed through the stained glass panel above the door, casting flecks of gold and sapphire across the hardwood. At first, the quiet didn't feel like loss. It felt like a question, asking me, what now? The next day, I was up early, brewing coffee the old way with the drip pot I'd dug out from the pantry. I grabbed my favorite mug, the one with the chipped edge, and sat at the kitchen table, cradling it in both hands, letting the warmth seep into my palms. For the first time in months, I didn't have to wait for the bathroom to free up. No need to check if someone ate the last egg or moved the salt to a random shelf. I didn't have to navigate noise or squeeze around other people's presence. I was just there, in my own house, free to be. That silence became a friend. I wandered through the house, taking my time, rediscovering rooms that had felt foreign under someone else's habits. I opened doors they'd kept closed, dusted shelves that held things I didn't recognize, and moved furniture back to face the windows instead of the TV. In my bedroom, my real bedroom, I stripped the sheets and flung the windows open. The breeze carried hints of rain and freshly cut grass. I let the closets breathe, folded my sweaters the way I like, not the space-saving way Sarah insisted on. I slid my books back where they belonged, arranged by author, not stacked by color. I found traces they'd left behind, scraps of a life that no longer fit, a stray sock behind the dresser, a broken toy in the guest room corner, a note Sarah had stuck to the fridge with reminders about bills, cleaning, and the boys' schedules. I peeled it off, folded it, and tossed it in the trash. For a few days, I didn't talk to anyone, not out of anger, but because I craved the calm. I needed to hear my own breath in the quiet. I wanted to know I wasn't just echoing someone else's world. At the grocery store, I bought what I wanted: creamy yogurt, crusty sourdough, strawberries even though they were pricey. I didn't glance at the oat milk's price tag, didn't need to. In the kitchen, I played classical music. One night, I even danced a little, barefoot, while waiting for the kettle to whistle. I laughed when I dropped a spoon and it clattered on the tile, startling the cat. I hadn't laughed that freely in months. That Friday, I knelt in the garden with my pruning shears, tending the rosebushes. The petals were just opening, their delicate edges swaying in the breeze. I took my time, each snip feeling like a small reclaiming of my space. The dirt was warm under my knees, and the sun warmed my neck like a gentle touch. I closed my eyes for a moment, soaking it in. Neighbors started waving again, some stopping to chat. Susan, from a few houses down, leaned in with a pitying look and asked if I was alone now. I just smiled and said, no, just getting back to how things should be. That night, I sat on the porch with a cold iced tea, watching the sky darken behind the trees. The house behind me felt tidy, peaceful, whole. The quiet wasn't empty anymore, it was mine. The house had a new kind of calm now, not the lonely kind. It was a steady, gentle stillness, like catching your breath after a long illness. Every room seemed to exhale the moment that front door closed behind them. The walls relaxed, the air softened. Corners where shadows once pooled now caught the morning light. I moved through the house like I was relearning an old song I hadn't sung in years. I kicked off my shoes without dodging someone's stray backpack. I played the radio as loud as I wanted. I started reading my books aloud again, not for anyone else, just for the walls, the air, and me. The rooms felt bigger, but not empty. They were filled with my own rhythm, my own sounds, the squeak of cabinet hinges, the creak of the floor near the hall closet, the soft hum of the fridge. No more tension or forced small talk. Just my presence, settled and sure. I painted the downstairs bathroom a soft lavender. I'd always wanted to, but Sarah once said it'd look dated. I chose the shade myself, drove to the hardware store, bought paint, brushes, and a drop cloth. I sang while I worked, off-key and a bit too loud. The cat sat in the doorway, watching me like I was a new person. I brought my old armchair back from the garage and set it by the living room window, right where I used to sit. The cushion's a little worn, but it's still the comfiest seat in the house. I placed a small table beside it, added my reading lamp, a coaster for my tea, and the little ticking clock Sarah used to complain about. I unpacked boxes of my things, not just the essentials, but the treasures, a ceramic dish from my Oregon honeymoon, a quilt my sister made 27 years ago, photo albums with pages that crinkle when you turn them. I spread them out, not to show off, but to remind myself. Proof I'd been here all along. Proof this house was mine, not just on paper, but in every fiber. On Saturday, I was up before dawn, baking a blueberry pie just for myself. The kitchen filled with the warm scent of melted butter, sugar, and fruit, and I sat at the table, eating a warm slice with my hands, the sticky juice staining my fingers. I didn't bother with a plate, didn't need to. Later that day, I had a locksmith change the locks, not out of fear, but to mark the end of one chapter and the start of another, a shiny new key, a different click when the door shuts, a fresh sense of stepping into my home. The quiet in the house became like an old friend. Every morning, it greeted me like a blank notebook, ready for a new day. I stopped flinching at shadows behind me. I didn't feel the need to apologize for walking into my own kitchen anymore. No more asking if it was okay to open a window or turn up my music. The mailbox filled with things just for me again. The bills came in my name. I ordered new return address labels, and when they arrived, I smiled as I stuck one on a letter to an old friend, my handwriting still bold and clear, still my own. People sometimes ask if I miss them, if it's strange to be on my own now. But here's the truth, I'm not really alone. I have this calm, these memories, and a quiet pride in facing hard times and coming out stronger. This house has known me in many ways: wife, mother, widow, provider, peacemaker, shadow. But now, it sees me for who I am, a woman with room to breathe, a voice to use, and time to call my own. I like to sit on the front porch as the sun sets, a book in my lap, the cat curled up by my feet. Neighbors pass by, some wave, others stop to chat. I nod back, smile, toss out a comment about the roses or the weather. But the real conversations, the best ones, happen in my own mind, quiet, easy, grounded. Because now, after everything, I can say it clearly: this is my house, and I'm exactly where I belong.